Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar from LRQA on how your organisation can use ISO standards to fight climate change. My name is Louise Hollings and I'm a marketing manager at LRQA for the UK and Ireland, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. Please note that everyone apart from our panellists will be muted during the webinar. However, you can submit text questions to the presenters by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. And you may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect these and go through as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We'll also be running some polls today. Please note that the responses are anonymous and the results will only be shared as a percentage on the screen. And this webinar is being recorded and we'll share a link with everyone who's registered in the coming days. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Olga Rivas has 25 years experience advising and auditing businesses on environmental, energy and health and safety risks, as well as helping organisations to drive cultural change. She's participated in verification projects for sustainability reports and non-financial information with a variety of large brands. Prior to this role, Olga worked as a consultant, trainer and auditor in environmental, energy and health and safety management systems and provided assessment and verification services for greenhouse gas emissions and other sustainability data, ISO 14001 and social auditing schemes, as well as various roles with LRQA related to management, training auditors and verifiers and leading complex verifications. And our second speaker today is Bill Barnes, Auditor Manager at LRQA in the States. Bill is an integrated senior lead assessor working with LRQA since 2005 and involved in ISO 9001, 14001, 45001 and responsible care audits. Bill has over 35 years of manufacturing, engineering, consulting, training and assessment experience for quality, health and safety, environmental and security aspects in the service and manufacturing industries. In recent years, he's been heading LRQA thought leadership efforts for workplace safety through ISO 45001 and 45003, psychosocial safety in the workplace, and he is a licensed professional engineer, IRCA principal auditor, and Exemplar Global Responsible Care Auditor. Welcome to you both. So our goals for the webinar today are to give you an overview of the relevant standards and frameworks, to discuss how management systems can input into your non-financial reporting, and to look at what are the recent amendments to many popular ISO standards and what this means for your organisation if you're already certified, and how you can prepare for your next audit. So before we get started, we'd just like to ask our first poll question for today. This will be useful to help our experts get a better understanding of our audience. And so our first question today is, what are the drivers for your climate change reporting obligations? And you can select all that apply. And the options here are clients, government, industry practice, shareholder expectations, or voluntary. So again, what are the drivers for your climate change reporting obligations? And those options again are clients, government regulation, industry practice, shareholder expectations, or are you looking at voluntary schemes? I'll just give everybody a few more seconds to answer. Okay. Okay, so Olga and Bill, would you like to comment on those results?
Okay.
Sure. Go ahead, Olga.
Okay. Good day. Welcome to all the participants joining us. I am delighted to be part of this session, fully aware of the pressing needs for action on climate change. This is a good picture of the drivers of the climate change. It depends a lot at the beginning, as you know. it was the governments, the legislations in US, in Europe, in Asia, but the clients are taking, and the investors, the shareholders' expectations are taking the most pressing challenge for the companies in order to report the climate change actions and to have climate change action plans. So I fully agree with your response, and I see reflected the clients that we are working with in your response.
Sure. I mean, just to add on to that real quickly is the context. We'll talk a lot about that during this hour, context of management systems, but the changing context, as you just pointed out, Olga, that, some of these things were internalized, voluntary is one of the choices now at the back of the pack, according to the poll, and clients are at the top. Who is interested in what you do and how that makes sense? In this case, climate change relevance, it's changing. So really neat to see the numbers.
Thank you both. And we'll now hand over to Olga to start the presentation.
Okay, so I would like to mention briefly before to start the 3 points that I will cover in this short session. First, we would like to provide an overview of the climate change context based on your response in the poll question and understanding why and from whom we receive calls for action. And as Bill said, the changing way that we are progressing on that. Second, we will then discuss the different frameworks of the related to climate change and environmental and ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria that, as you know, they are interconnected because climate change is an important part of the ESG reporting. And third, we will explore how management system standards can help us to report on and fight climate change. First to start, I would like to say that it's crucial to acknowledge that global organizations are obligated not only to communicate their challenge and progress regarding climate change this year, but also in the long term, extending all the way until 2050. So your strategies, objectives, baseline year comparisons, and performance should be consistent over time and reflect the actions that you are taking. So let's go with the next slide, please, in relation with the context. You can see here that in the climate change, and there are growing demands from various stakeholders for action. Many CEOs have committed to ambitious emissions reductions, for example, carbon neutrality, you have heard, carbon neutrality by 2040, or reduce the 30% by 2030, only 6 years to go. So, additionally, for example, as Bill will explain in detail later, also the ISO committee has decided to integrate climate action in all the standards of management system. So we need to understand and identify the context and explain why trust and transparency in our strategies and information disclosure are essential, and the importance of having a robust climate transition plan and the increasing significance of assurance and climate change. As you know, and as you said, all this was initiated, began around 2005 with legislators and regulators in US, Europe, Asia, UK, because it was required certain companies to report their emissions and participate in these flexible credit markets, emission markets, to achieve reductions. So there are a lot of companies that are involved, as you say, at 50% in the government requirements. However, I would like to emphasize that the investors have emerged as prominent agents of change in the last 5 years. They are increasingly seeking transparency regarding the climate change and performance of organizations that they consider for investment. In this context, for example, we can highlight the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Projects, because the investors rely in this data, in the CDP data, to evaluate the environmental performance and the climate change risks of the organizations. This information should be verified before to report in CDP according, for example, ISO 14064 Part 1 or the GHG protocol. And I would like to mention that LRQA is a partner of CDP. And these reported CO2 emissions allow for comparisons for different companies, helping investors identifying which actions and investments have been already been made by this company or this organization. So this information is crucial for guiding investment decisions. And as you mark here, with a 58% of the clients, the customer demands is another significant driver of change. For example, as you know, the automotive sector has committed to sell only carbon neutral cars by 2037. This includes not only electrical vehicles, but also ensuring that all the parts of the car, including lubricants, are zero emissions too. As a result, the suppliers in the automotive industry are striving to reduce the emissions of their components. In terms of society, an example could be the large food and drinks companies are already showcasing their commitment through verified reports and claims demonstrating to the society their commitments and achievements. So these trends may be familiar, but the key point is building the stakeholder trust. And the question is, how can an organization build the trust it needs? And our response is independent assurance, because it's vital, because it enables you to demonstrate both internally, that is very important too, and externally, that your performance meets the expectations. So we can go to the second slide, to the second point that we mentioned, that is that you need for your indicators a unique source of truth for the whole organization. So it's essential to adopt a holistic view of your goals, frameworks, standards, and regulations before embarking on the disclosure of climate change data. This ensures alignment with objective and also with the regulatory requirements, enhancing this credibility and relevance of the disclosed information. So let's go and start with the goals. Many companies, as you know, have committed to aligning with the Paris Agreement goal of keeping global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. So, or for example, becoming a member of initiatives like the Science Based Target, the SBTi, is of great interest as it guides and supports companies in setting and achieving ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction goals aligning with climate science. Moving onto the frameworks, let's consider, for example, the ESRS, European Sustainability Reporting Standards, for companies that are reporting in Europe, whether as a legal entity or a group. For example, if you are a global company, you might choose the Global Reporting Initiative, or for example, if you have the expectation from your investors, you could select also the CDP scheme depending on your stakeholder needs. There are no significant difference between the various frameworks, but it's essential to align them before embarking on the monitoring to avoid this discrepancy between data. For standards, we can consider ISO 14064 Part 1 for corporate reporting, or for example, for organizations, also the GHG protocol for guidance and also for verification. If you are interested in the verification of your products of the carbon footprint of your product, you can use the ISO 14067. And if you are in the roadmap of demonstrating your carbon neutrality, you have these standards, for example, ISO 14068. It is a new standard designed for this carbon neutrality commitment or achievement. The GHG protocol is especially useful and can be also verified, although without accreditation, but also verified. In relation with the regulations, depending by country, obviously. For example, if you are in the US, you have to be aware and know the CAC regulations, or for example, if you are in UK, the UK ETS is important, or if you are in Europe, the Corporate Social Reporting Directive, it is very important to have in account. So let's go to the third point of the presentation in the next slide. That is in relation how can management system input to your non-financial reporting. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how a management system can help us. I mentioned during the session several tools that you are familiar because they are included in the management system and they can be used for building these climate change reports and climate change transitions. I would like to mention, first of all, the responsibilities, starting by the board level in relation with strategies, risks, context, expectations, and needs of the stakeholders, until the more detailed responsibility included in a work instruction, for example, the monitoring, the calibration of the equipment that you are using in your sites, etc. It is very important to mention the objectives and programs because it is very important to link the climate change strategy with these objectives, plans, and programs, creating a strong connection with continual improvement. The main difference, it could be that you are used to have annual objectives or programs, and these objectives that we are discussing, for example, reducing the 30% of your emissions by 2030, is a 6 years emissions if you are starting now. But it doesn't matter because this is step by step, and you have to create this annual or triennial, for example, objectives using this tool that your organization is used to work with. Another important are the key performance indicators. That is a very strong point of the management system. We are talking about, for example, absolute emissions, intensity emissions, emissions by products, and also the risk management. Here you can say that in the different, for example, in the different schemes, you have different options. For example, the ISO 50001 is a very good standard for the scope 1 and scope 2 in relation with the emissions that are produced in your organization or used in the organization as electricity. ISO 14001, it is very useful to include also, for example, not only the scope 1 and scope 2, it's a good tool to include, for example, points related with the scope 3 supply chains, purchasing of services and goods, transport, and so on. So you have here good opportunities in order to use this standard. Operations departments are used in managing systems and defining clear responsibilities and operational improvement objectives. So it's crucial to integrate climate change into operational performance. This entails incorporating strategies in this management system to implement actions, as I said, responsibilities, improvement programs, indicators, to bridge this gap between strategy and operational process effectively. And in the other hand, you have valuable data generated and reviewed by operations essential for your reporting. So resuming, in a management system, you can find and use an important set of tools to create resilience and long-term viability. Management systems are a vital tools navigating the complex landscape of climate change because they provide structured guidelines and a strategic approach to manage risk effectively while transitioning toward more sustainable practices. So please integrate as much as possible your climate strategy in your management system to embark all your organization in the continual improvement to the sustainability transition. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Before we hand over to Bill, we'd just like to ask another poll question, please. So, which aspects are most significant for your organization regarding climate change? So again, you can select all that apply, and the options are raw materials and supply chain, resource consumption, whether that's water, energy, other fuels, manufacturing or service operations, distribution to marketplaces, or the product content, its use, and life cycle considerations after sale. So that question again, which aspects are most significant for your organization regarding climate change? And you can select all that apply. So the options again are raw materials and supply chain, resource consumption, manufacturing or service operations, distribution, or the product content, use, and life cycle considerations after sale. So I'll just give you a few more seconds for the votes to come in. Thank you to everyone who's voted already, and here we go. So Olga and Bill, if you'd like to comment on the results, that would be great.
I'll let you start, Olga.
Okay, so it depends a lot. It depends a lot of the sector and the company. For example, the companies that are more emitters, for example, let's say chemicals or paper or this sort of companies, the water, energy and fuels or electricity have a very, let's say, important, it could be the 50%. But for example, in the, as you said here, that you have marked the 80%. But in the scope 3 that there are the other emissions, for example, the food and drinks companies and the companies that have, let's say, big supply chains of distributions and materials, they are in the raw materials and supply chains. These are the second point. So depending a lot of the sector, but in the, let's say, in the majority of the companies, it could be that the scope 3 included raw materials, distribution and product content. It could be in a lot of companies more than the 90% of the climate change carbon footprint.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, I hope that by the end of this webinar and some of the insights people get out of it, that third line, manufacturing service operations, I'm hoping that it's much greater than 46% after today. And that's kind of part of the context of why we're here today to talk about what we are. So.
Thank you both. And over to you, Bill.
Okay. So what's changed in ISO management system standards? Let's show you that here in the next slide. So why have many of the familiar ISO management systems standards been amended? Well, it seems that the changes were suddenly published earlier this year. Efforts have been driven for some time, beginning with the London Declaration on Climate Change in 2021. This prompted a review of the great many ISO standards available globally that we all work with. Creating change in the ISO community requires effect on the management system standards we all work with. So that's kind of the premise here. There are over 30 management system standards that have been impacted earlier this year with language we'll discuss in a moment. Of course, in 2021, ISO signed into force. It's London Declaration on Climate Change, in which ISO committed to work with its members, national standard bodies, and other stakeholders and partners to ensure that international standards and publications accelerate the achievement of the Paris Agreement. You saw that earlier, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and the United Nations Call for Action on Adoption and Resilience. So this all amounts to making action on climate change a strategic priority for the whole of the ISO organization. The declaration included a specific commitment to foster the active consideration of climate change and associated transitions in the development of all new and revised international standards and publications. So in making that declaration, ISO recognized the importance of this in the international standards and how they would play out in the world's effects to address global climate emergency. Such standards play a crucial role in underpinning the global economy. We've seen that, creating trust in all aspects of international trade. We talked about the trust factor already. Promoting good practice and providing the basis for assurance and data. So quick change, but it's been well thought through. We'll see what that change is right now on the next slide. Pretty straightforward, right? A couple of brief statements under clauses 4.1, 4.2. As I mentioned, these changes went into effect to over 30 management system standards, most of which on 29 February. It was an unprecedented swift call to action by affected organizations. While considered for some time, we just talked about, they were published with immediate effect. So these changes to these subclauses of the context of the organization are in place now across these many standards. So folks like our LRQA management systems standard auditors are auditing to these requirements. So the opportunity at hand here is to understand the relevance in the context of individual systems, including interested parties. Olga's comments should help you to begin to understand to some of these external expectations as one of her slides brought forth. So there's a lot of external interest in a lot of information about your organizations, the way that you do business, the way that you think about certain business risks as they relate to climate change. So we trust that this webinar allows you to now understand internal opportunities and expectations as well. As I mentioned at that last poll, I want that middle ribbon manufacturing and operations to be a little bit at the forefront. And if you're paying attention to what is going on with some of the standards and some of the guidance we'll share here, I hope that's a great outcome for organizations. So let's look beyond the context of the organization. Our next slide brings up some of the various other clauses you'll find in most of the ISO standards that have relevance for climate change. But beyond the straightforward changes to the context of the organization and its management system and understanding the needs of interested parties, these changes will have a direct impact throughout the standard. Some of the ones that we'll talk about is 6.1 actions to address risk and opportunities, changes, resources, operations, performance and evaluation, even management review. So there are lots of places for those who do maintain and management systems. There are lots of places that we will inflect here. Not enough time today to go into it all, perhaps the subject of a future webinar, but we'll throw a couple samples out just to prove, so you can understand the point. So let's take a look at some of this in particular. how do we go about doing this? Good news is, as the next slide will show, the IAF International Accreditation Forum. Yeah, let's jump ahead to the next slide. There we go. IAF has released this ISO 9001 auditing practice group guidance on auditing climate change issues in ISO 9001. Came out in March of this year. We'll put a link in the chat here somewhere along the way to where you can get this document. It provides the certified community across these many ISO standards some insights on how they might consider the relevance of climate change across the many elements of their systems. The harmonized Annex SL structure across many management systems standards should enable transference to other schemes like health and safety, food safety, energy management, even information security. It's built on these 2 points you see here on screen to consider in the context of 9001. First of all, the ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. What we make, is it's still meeting that external expectation. Quality management systems are about those customers. So as you can see in some of the earlier polls, some of the customers and clients, and they could be shareholders as well, that dial is moving. The second point is to enhance customer satisfaction through the effective application of the system, including processes for improvement of the system, and again, the assurance of conformity to customer and applicable statutory regulatory requirements. So it's really pointing towards these strong external factors that have been part of ISO 9000 for some time and steering us into a lot of the conversation that Olga gave us heading in here. There are additional guidance documents expected that may focus on individual standards, but built off the basis of the quality management standard 9001. We'll take an opportunity here in the next few minutes to just explore a few of those. A very important aspect we'll discuss further is the implications for the supply chain of raw materials and component elements. You saw that come about as one of the top entries in that last poll that we sent out. They're part of an organization's product realization. In other words, are we considering the relevance of climate change from these important aspects of doing business that are on the front end of what we do? Those raw materials, those supply chain partners, you see a lot more of that coming up in ESG, inquiries, surveys, reporting requirements. That's a part of any quality management system is control of that front end of your business. Good materials, good parts, good relationships, on-time delivery certainly helps everything in an organization while you're going through product realization. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So in what ways might these other clauses in other management systems standards be utilized to drive consideration of the relevance of climate change? As Olga offered earlier, standards with direct inference to environmental considerations, such as 14001, 14064 for greenhouse gas verification, and ISO 50001 energy management systems, which seem to immediately embrace climate change risks and opportunities. Okay, I think we can see that. In fact, updates to these standards are well underway. They offer direct pathways for organizations to focus on environmental and energy continual improvement, and a sound framework for measuring and demonstrating that success. right? So that's what we've all understood about those. So for now, let's explore this 9001 base guidance, take a peek at some other examples. We'll look at some 14001, we'll look at some ISO 45001, occupational health and safety, and how to tie in there. We'll look at some examples from several key clauses, as you see here, to demonstrate how universal this IAF document is and where your organization should look to focus efforts to address the relevance of climate change. Clause 6.1, just to get things started, actions to address risks and opportunities is part of most any standard. A little bit of different language as you go from one ISO to another, the context of the scheme, so to speak. But it's the key. It's the on button for a management system that starts the engine to get a system started. What are those risks and opportunities that are in front of us? How has the organization considered these to determine the risks and opportunities? Do these issues lead to change in support, infrastructure, monitoring and measurement, and that equipment related to it, knowledge, communication, or other? What are the risks that need to be addressed, and are the relevant changes in operational processes being realized? Do they need to be monitored and measured for success to demonstrate climate change impacts and improvements? So has the organization determined these new opportunities? New products or services often require financial investment, sometimes new funding mechanisms to change infrastructure and processes. There's a cost and a benefit of green technologies, and we'll explore how they influence, impact, and should be considered in some of these other contexts. So let's go over to occupational health and safety. Next slide, please. Anybody working in this standard for ISO 45001 knows clause 6.1.2.1 is where we identify our hazards, right? There are a number of subclauses. I think it's A through G. I'm just going to grab a couple here. B and F, routine and non-routine activities and situations, including hazards arising from items 1 and 2 there. And after the other issues, such as the design of work areas, processes, machinery, equipment, you can start to understand as we change up our manufacturing to address those external interests. We do put some influence on the workplace and exposure to hazards. A couple examples that you might hear about come to mind. First off, agricultural and public work sectors. With many outdoor work activities and extreme temperatures for longer periods of the year due to climate change in many geographies around the world, you'll see a lot of transition to conducting those work activities at night, whether it's in orchards harvesting or in highway construction. What is the workplace setting impacts on working under lighted conditions versus daylight to avoid excessive heat exposure? So yes, we're changing things up, just an example there. Some industries are exploring alternative chemicals or manufacturing processes to reduce energy or water consumption. There's new chemicals in place or other physical properties in the manufacturing activity that change the potential for work exposures. As a good example, there are some heated drying of parts versus evaporative properties of those good old ozone depleting chemicals we used to use. Workers might have exposure to heat sources now versus toxic fumes in the past. So just think about that. Management of change in the workplace brings about a lot of need to reevaluate, put this 6.1.21 into action. Let's go ahead and look at clause 7 on the next slide, please. So clause 7, support or resources in many of these management system standards directs organizations to define who and what will be needed to implement controls for changes made to address climate change relevance. So you see up top here a couple examples from the IAF guidance document directly. When you get that document in your hand, you'll see you get the clause 7, 714, and 716, some opportunities for you to consider climate change in your quality management system. A great one here is ISO 14001 clause 7.3, again in that resource. I just point out a few things here. Does the environmental policy include commitments that extend to the relevance of climate change? Is that in your policy yet? We're looking for that as auditors. Are climate change impacts of significance to be considered as part of an environmental management system? Again, is climate change on your aspect register? Can the workforce contribute to the effectiveness of the system and its goals, including those that support sustainable business practices? We talked about involvement, engagement, getting the workforce involved. This is in their world and all around them. If they know that they can affect change, or even if there's the possibility of that, how do we engage? Again, management systems ought to be able to steer you to engage that workforce. And then finally, the climate change relevance and its ability to be driven by the workforce begins with awareness, and the standard provides an effective framework to assure what matters is known to those that can provide a contribution, i.e. the workforce and their ability to affect changes. So again, the clause 7 gives us some opportunities. Let's move ahead to the next slide. We'll talk just a few minutes about clause 8. Certainly in this case, I picked ISO 45001, clause 8.1.3, management of change. If you're familiar with this at all, a management of change clause, it's finding itself into all of the ISO standards. It's been a big part of occupational health and safety. Regardless of what the reason we make changes, when we make changes, we disturb that work environment, the locations, the surroundings, the conditions, the organization, and sometimes the equipment. When we're doing that, we could be introducing risks, or we need to at least make people aware of the risks involved. Certainly changes that produce a more environmentally friendly product to satisfy sustainability claims might be accomplished with changes to all of these things. We saw this in the examples I offered a few minutes ago, some of those changes. So again, are we evaluating workplace risk, occupational health and safety risk when we're adopting these changes to pursue our climate change goals and objectives? And then finally, let's look at clause 9 for just a moment. Next slide, please. So clause 9, if you're familiar, it's performance evaluation. In most of the management system standards, it defines the manner and means by which success can be measured and demonstrated, and provides leadership with the analytics to demonstrate commitment, drive change, garner support, or show results. A few years ago, our sustainability services team approached me to provide insights about how organizations with management systems, have an advantage in the race to demonstrate sustainable business practices. And we got into it, and the point there was that a very powerful advantage is that organizations that have defined and implemented transparent and accurate measures to demonstrate performance can readily compile these results for things like greenhouse gas verification and other ESG related reports. Even more important, the results can be more readily verified by independent parties, which results in stronger confidence by interested parties that organizations are walking the walk. So at the end of the day, this translates to stronger shareholder value. So if you kind of look at this progression on screen here, talks a lot to what Olga had introduced. She talked about building trust. She talked about independent verification. All that comes very readily, very strongly in those organizations that have management systems in place. So again, it's Clause 9 has always been an important part of any management system. It can be an important part of demonstrating what you're doing when it comes to the relevance of climate change. At the end of the day, stronger shareholder value, no matter what that shareholder's interest, it could be financial, it could be otherwise. So a very important part of it. Okay, let's move along to the next slide, please. Just kind of sum it up. We'll have some time for questions and answers. Certainly, we hope that some of that quick walk through some of the ISO standards, you can kind of see where that guide will work across most any of the ISO standards. The 9001 was one of the early adopters of Annex SL. It's been around since 2015 now. All the other standards kind of find that framework, find that pathway, and should work for you all. So really, review that guidance and consider what it means for your organization. What is relevant and what is proportionate in the context of your organization. What should we be managing? Involve your people where appropriate to identify the relevant risks and opportunities, particularly the examples from 45,001 I showed you. Engage them. We want to do this right. If at the end of the day, a smaller carbon footprint in a manufacturing enterprise results in a safer workplace in that enterprise, we're hitting E and S and probably G when we're doing our ESG reporting. It's important to demonstrate progress wherever you are on the journey. So this whole concept of verification is very important, and you shouldn't be afraid to share what you're doing, and that's a big part of building that trust, independent verification, transparency to what you're doing. So I hope that this has helped your organization to understand the relevance of climate change, how it's come about, and what can we be doing with our management system standards. So back over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Bill. So just before we jump to the Q&A, we've got one last poll question for you. This is just to see if you may need any support over the next 12 months. So will your organisation be looking for any of the following services in the next 12 months? Will you be looking for greenhouse gas emissions verification, project carbon footprint verification, any other data verification or report assurance, management systems gap analysis or certification, or training? And those options again. So greenhouse gas emissions verification, project carbon footprint verification, other data verification or report assurance, management systems gap analysis or certification, or training. Thank you for everyone who's taken part. We'll just give a few more seconds for the responses to come through. And then we'll jump over to the Q&A. Just a reminder that you can continue to post your questions. We've had lots come in already, so thank you for those. And here we go. So Olga, if it's okay, we'll start with you. So during the session, ISO 14064-1 and the GHG protocol were mentioned for corporate reporting for organisations. Which one does LRQA recommend?
Okay, so LLQA recommends both ISO 14064 Part 1 and the GRC protocol for the verification, because both frameworks are widely recognized and accepted internationally. However, the choice between them can depend on the organization's specific needs and operational factors. For example, ISO 14064 Part 1 is an international standard that provides specifications and some guidelines for the quantification and reporting emissions and removals at the organizational level. So it has a clear standardized framework for emissions quantification and reporting, and is an ISO standard that is widely recognized and accepted globally. But GRC protocol is an excellent guidance. It's an international initiative that provides standards, tools, guidance for GRC emissions measurement. It's ideal for organizations seeking detailed and flexible guidance for GRC emissions measurement, or for companies with complex and diverse operations that require a comprehensive and adaptable approach. For example, in US, it has a broad adoption and is used by many companies worldwide, facilitating comparison and benchmarking between organizations. So both standards are robust and recognized tools for verifying the carbon footprint. So your elections should be based on your organization's specific needs, compatibility with the existing management system, or your stakeholder requirements, for example. Or, for example, for integration with another ISO, it could be that ISO 14064 Part 1, it could be a good option because they have common points, but for example, GRC protocol it has a lot of detail, a lot of support, is an updated standard with a lot of information, for example, with the scope free. So it depends on your organization. So, but both of them are very good references to take in account.
Thank you, Olga. Bill, if we can come to you for the next one. So it's a question from Russell. He's asked, would a certification body such as LRQA expect an organization that has ISO 9001 certification only to report on climate change implications of their business, such as packaging consumption or vehicle use emissions? If, for example, overall carbon footprint is not calculated, would that be flagged as a non-conformity within the QMS?
That's a really good question, and we're all just coming out of the gate on this. If you look at 4.1 in that new language, it simply asks, what is the relevance? So certainly, if there are these things that were mentioned that don't seem to straight away appear to be ISO 9001, quality related to the product doesn't seem to just come to mind on the outset. It is important. Packaging consumption, vehicle carbon footprint. You know, when you get into if you're not reporting at this time for carbon footprint, you may soon be, or you may be getting inquiries from some of your clients or customers who are, you know, so one of your customer inquiries in a quality management system say, okay, can you give me an idea of vehicle carbon footprint for all your receiving and shipping, because I have to report it. And if I can't do that, I might raise a customer non-conformity against your organization. Is that happening? We see that happening already. Yeah, we can kind of address it, and sometimes it's not, you know, the quality experts in our organization that provide that. But yeah, it's emerging right now. What we're looking for is or have you considered the relevance? It should be interesting to see where 9001, when it does some language change in the next year or two, specifically what it's looking for.
Thank you, Bill. So Olga, if we can come back to you, can you explain the verification process and whether you get a certificate at the end of that, or what kind of document is issued as a result of verification?
Okay, so the verification process has, let's say, two stages with client. The first stage is called strategic analysis and risk analysis. And let's say that is a preliminary review of your organization's greenhouse gases, inventory, emission data, and related documentation, and if you have a report. So we identify the verification risk and the strategy risk and make a sampling plan and a verification plan. Sampling plan, it's more similar to the financial audits than the management system audits, because it's like the evidences that we need to review in order to say that this inventory or this report are meeting the requirements and the number are correct. And later we have the stage 2, that is the verification data collection evaluation, that is mainly gathering and assessing data to assure accuracy, consistency, transparency, and completeness and relevance of the ESG emissions reporting. So later we prepare a verification report detailing findings, conclusions, or any discrepancies or issues identified during the process. And at least there is a technical review and approval, an independent technical review of all to ensure that the verification activities have been satisfactorily completed and any issues have been addressed. And regarding to the type of document issued, we have the following documents as outputs. A verification statement is a formal document confirming the verification of the ESG emissions inventory and report detailing the scope, methodology, and conclusions. And a verification report, that is a comprehensive report more similar, for example, to ISO 9000 or 14000, that include the findings of the verification process or any identified issues and recommendations for improvement.
Thank you, Olga. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so we'll just try and get through a few more questions before we reach the top of the hour. Bill, if we can come to you next, we've got a question from Cohen. He said, they've said that they're struggling a bit with the angle of the change. Are we looking to the outside, or like what can we act on regarding climate change, or is it looking at how climate change is affecting us as a business? So I wonder if you can give some clarification on that.
It's a bit of both, what's going on the outside, what's going on the inside. I think if you recall, I said I'm hoping that the crowd on that third row, manufacturing operations, that I think was only 46% of the crowd, grows much higher because there's opportunity internally to act upon things that are relevant to and from climate change that external factors are going to appreciate, interested parties and such. So.
Thank you, Bill. And the next one, Olga, if we can come back to you. We've had quite a few around performance metrics. So let me see if I can just put a couple of these together. So Steve has asked if his organization can like personalize performance metrics by basing them on scientific publications that may not have been considered within the regulations. Do you have any comment
Okay.
on the kind of metrics that could be used?
Okay, it depends a lot of the regulator and the scheme, because there are, for example, there are schemes that you cannot change anything because it's like especially the schemes, the framework related with the carbon credit exchange and so on. It is a very fixed and close way to do it. In the related with the reporting, with the ESG reporting, there is more flexibility. But for example, specifically in the case of the climate change, all the frameworks are very similar. For example, in the ESRIs of the CSRD, of the Corporate Social Reporting Directive, it is the GSG protocol framework, very similar with the Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. So in the part of climate change, is quite, let's say, close, or there is a big consensus about in which way should be reporting. In other metrics of ESG that are more new or there are no so many experience, it could be recommended the option that you are proposing.
Thank you, Olga. I'm afraid we've run out of time for today, and we've had lots of other questions that we've not had a chance to get to. So what we'll do after the session today is I'll share all the questions with Bill and Olga, and we'll try and get back to everybody with answers to your questions. And we really appreciate you submitting those today. So we'll try and get back to you as soon as we can with answers. So I would like to end by thanking Olga and Bill, and thanking everybody for attending today's webinar. Once you leave the webinar today, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate it if you can complete that and provide your feedback. And you'll also receive a follow-up email within the next few days with a link so you can view the recording of the webinar if there's anything you'd like to watch again. So on behalf of LRQA and our presenters, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.